You remember a time when the internet didn't control everything? No smartphones, no social media, no constant notifications, just real life. Now imagine being the last generation to grow up in that world, and then suddenly being thrown into the digital one. That's exactly what happened to Xennials. They're not really Gen X. They're not quite millennials. They're something in between. A tiny, almost forgotten generation called Xennials. And psychologically, they might be one of the most fascinating generations alive today. Because they didn't just watch the world change. They lived through one of the biggest transformations in human history, from a quiet analog life to a hyper-connected digital reality. And that strange journey shaped the way they think, trust people, handle relationships, and even understand success. But here's the part most people don't realize. Growing up between two completely different worlds changes your brain in ways you don't notice, until one day you realize you see life very differently from everyone else. Xennials were probably the last generation to experience a fully analog childhood. No smartphones, no social media, no constant notifications. When they were kids, if you wanted to talk to someone, you called their house. And if they weren't home, you just had to wait. Imagine that today. No texting, no "where are you?" no instant reply, just patience. Kids went outside, they played until the streetlights turned on. They made friends without filters, likes, or followers, and psychologically, that created something powerful. They learned how to deal with real-life interaction. Awkward conversations, real rejection, real friendship, no digital shield, just people. And that built a kind of emotional toughness many later generations didn't develop the same way. And then, something crazy happened. While they were teenagers or young adults, the internet exploded. Computers, chat rooms, emails, the early days of the web, and suddenly, their entire world started changing. They had to learn technology while growing up. Not as kids, but while already forming their identity. And that created a unique psychological trait: adaptability. Xennials know how to survive in two systems: the slow world and the fast one. They can have deep conversations face to face, but also navigate digital life better than many older generations. They remember both realities, and that dual experience shaped how they see life. Here's something many Xennials secretly feel. They often feel like they don't fully belong anywhere. Too young to relate completely to Gen X, too old to relate fully to millennials, and that in-between position creates a strange psychological perspective. They're observers. They notice patterns in society others miss. They remember how things used to be, but they also understand where things are going. It's like standing on a bridge between two eras, watching the past fade while the future rushes in. And that position can sometimes feel lonely, but it also creates depth. Many Xennials developed a very specific kind of skepticism because they witnessed massive social change. They saw technology transform communication, media change overnight, entire industries disappear, and that experience quietly taught them something. Nothing stays stable forever. So they tend to question systems more. They're not easily impressed by hype. They've seen too many trends rise and collapse, and psychologically, that makes them cautious, not cynical, just realistic. Here's another fascinating thing. Most Xennials didn't grow up sharing their lives online. There were no Instagram stories documenting every moment. Their childhood memories exist mostly in their minds, not on servers. So when social media arrived, many of them felt something strange. Why is everyone broadcasting everything? Why does every moment need an audience? And that's why a lot of Xennials still maintain a different relationship with privacy. They might use technology, but they don't feel the same pressure to constantly perform their life. Because deep down, they remember a world where life happened quietly. But there's also a darker side to the Xennial experience. They entered adulthood during extremely turbulent times. Economic crashes, rapid technological disruption, job markets constantly shifting, and suddenly the rules changed. The careers their parents followed no longer existed. Stability became harder to find. So many Xennials developed a survival mindset: work harder, adapt faster, stay relevant, and over time. That pressure created something psychologists call chronic low-level stress. Not dramatic panic, just a constant feeling of needing to keep up, always adjusting, always learning, always trying to stay ahead of change. Growing up between two worlds creates perspective, and perspective creates reflection. Many Xennials spend a lot of time thinking about life, about where society is heading, about how technology changed human connection, about what we gained, and what we, quietly, lost. They remember life moving slower, people being harder to reach, but maybe also easier to truly know, and that awareness often makes them reflective people. Not louder, just deeper. But here's the interesting twist. This strange in-between generation might actually have an advantage today because modern life demands adaptability. And that's exactly what Xennials spent their entire lives practicing. They learned to evolve, to switch systems, to understand both analog thinking and digital speed. And in a world changing faster than ever, that skill becomes incredibly valuable. They're translators between generations, between cultures, between two completely different ways of living. Most generations grow up in a relatively stable world. The rules stay mostly the same. The systems stay mostly the same. But Xennials didn't have that luxury. They saw the entire system shift under their feet. Music went from cassette tapes to CDs, to MP3 players, to streaming. Communication went from letters to emails to instant messaging. Information went from libraries to search engines. Imagine living through all of that in just a couple of decades. Your brain learns something important when the world changes that fast. You stop assuming things will stay the same. You start expecting change. And psychologically, that makes people more adaptable than they even realize, because they've already survived massive transitions before. There's another quiet trait many Xennials share. They often crave something that feels rare today: genuine connection. Not the kind measured by likes or comments, but the kind that happens in long conversations, late-night talks, unfiltered moments. Because they remember life before attention became a currency. They remember friendships that existed without constant updates, without algorithms deciding what people saw. And that memory creates a different emotional standard, a standard where connection feels deeper when it's private, where conversations matter more than broadcasts, where relationships are measured by presence, not visibility. But there's also something people rarely talk about. Being part of an in-between generation can sometimes feel lonely. Gen X had their cultural identity. Millennials built theirs around the internet era. But Xennials, they were the transition. Too young to fully belong to one group, too old to completely relate to the other. And sometimes that creates a strange psychological feeling, like you're always slightly out of place, like you understand different perspectives, but rarely feel fully understood yourself. But here's the twist. That same experience also creates empathy, because when you don't perfectly fit into one box, you learn to understand. There's one thing many Xennials carry quietly: a memory of slowness, a time when life didn't move at algorithm speed, when weekends felt longer, when people disappeared for hours without anyone worrying, when friendships weren't constantly maintained through notifications. Life had gaps, silence, space to think. And those memories matter more than most people realize, because once you've experienced that kind of pace, you never completely forget it. Even when the world around you speeds up, Some part of you still remembers how it felt when things were simpler. And this is where things get interesting. The modern world is becoming overwhelming for many people. Information everywhere, constant notifications, endless opinions, but Xennials have something many others don't: perspective. They remember a life without constant digital stimulation, which means they know something many people are now trying to rediscover: how to step back, how to disconnect, how to slow down, and, ironically, the future may actually reward that ability. Because the people who can balance technology with real life often end up the most mentally stable in a chaotic world. So when people talk about generations, Xennials often get overlooked. They're a small group, a quiet group, but their experience might be one of the most important. Because they didn't just grow up during change, they lived through a complete transformation of how humans communicate, work, and connect. They remember the last moments of the analog world, and they helped build the digital one. They're not just another generation. They're a bridge between two eras of human history. And sometimes, the people standing on bridges see things the rest of us miss. If you found this perspective interesting, you're not alone. Because the psychology of generations tells us something powerful. The world changes, technology evolves, but the human mind is always trying to adapt. And sometimes the people who experience the biggest changes end up understanding life the most deeply.